Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we've seen Poor Things, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, written by Tony McNamara, who previously wrote The Favourite, I think,
Oh, right.
for Yorgos Lanthimos, and also Cruella. So it's his third Emma Stone film in a row.
Oh.
And Yorgos Lanthimos is, continuing to work with Emma Stone, and I think the next film he makes will also be with Emma Stone. So he's obviously found his muse. We've seen a couple of Lanthimos films on the podcast. So The Favourite is one, and before that, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. I've also seen The Lobster.
I've seen The Lobster,
which I think is my favourite of his films. And Dogtooth was the one that really made his name. I think that was about his third film, and I still haven't seen that one.
I haven't seen that either.
He's a filmmaker that I really like, and he has an incredible reputation. People love his movies. He's able to... He has the freedom somehow to create these very original, weird, quirky films with a very. We were talking the other day when we saw Next Goal Wins about a Taika Waititi film, and you can just tell. And I think there's the same thing going on with Yorgos Lanthimos. You feel it, right? It's in the look and it's in the sensibilities. This is based on a 1992 Scottish novel called Poor Things, episodes from the early life of Archibald McCandless, MD, Scottish Public Health Officer. The film is about, the film is obviously slightly different from the novel. So the film is about a young woman, played by Emma Stone, who is living in the house of a mad scientist doctor type, a Frankenstein type, played by Willem Dafoe, and behaves in extremely weird ways. We don't obviously understand what is going on at the beginning, but what we come to learn is that this doctor, scientist, found her dead, having committed suicide, having jumped off a bridge, dead and heavily pregnant, and rather than save her, thinking, if I save her, she'll continue to be miserable, this woman wanted to end her life, he takes the opportunity to perform a wild scientific experiment, remove the fetus, remove the brain from the fetus, transplant it into the woman's head, so she is now her own daughter and her own mother at the same time, both and neither. And she becomes this new woman, Bella. I don't want to say too much more, obviously we'll get into spoiler territory. What happens is a kind of an adventure in which she grows up. A child is growing up in a grown woman's body and goes on adventures and particularly discovers sexuality and discovers interplay between men and women in the world, and how it all kind of works. It's also, I should say, set in a kind of steampunk Victorian era. As I understand it, the novel was set in a realistic Victorian era, so there's a lot of heightening going on here. So there you go. We'll get into spoiler territory. What was your experience of the film? How'd you find it?
I loved it. I was immediately immersed in the world. I think it's important to say that the first images you see are images of her committing suicide. Yeah, like it's her on the bridge.
That's the very opening.
Yeah.
It's like a cold open.
I thought, for me, at the end of it, I was surprised to read now that it was 145 minutes long, because, it felt much faster to me. And I was entranced both by the depth, or, the complexity of the ideas. It is about, a woman who is a new being combined of her mother and her daughter. Yeah. Or the result of a mother and a daughter, trying to find her own identity. And I think it's a combination of Frankenstein, but it's also, to me, the strongest influence would seem to be a female, rather feminist, Candide. Yeah, Voltaire's Candide. Except whereas what Candide suffers from is kind of excessive optimism, right? Here, the ruling idea is reason, yeah, and the limits of reason. So, I think you might have over-focused on the sexuality, though that is a large part of it, right? She also learns morality and ethics and, yeah, kind of, why are those poor people down there? Why are those babies dying? And, kind of, why don't we do something about it? The film raises all other kinds of questions, as well as, yeah, a kind of a self-determination and sexual awakening.
This is my least favourite Lanthimos film, definitely. Although there were lots of things that I liked, and it made me laugh a lot. It has lots of very good jokes, and it's not just jokes, but it's bits of performance. Mark Ruffalo plays this guy who kind of happens upon her, sort of finds out who she is. This lawyer type who's bringing this contract, and he essentially steals her away to go on an adventure in Europe. And he goes from being incredibly self-confident and, I believe I'm the best lover in the world, or very controlling. And when he starts losing her, because she is this uncageable free bird who doesn't obey any rules, his transformation into, confused, incredibly needy, crying, and then it does a joke where it reenacts Streetcar Named Desire with him on the ground going, Bella! I wasn't convinced by him at the start. I thought I didn't like the accent so much. I didn't like that I don't know.
I felt that.
There's a lispiness or something that he's doing with his voice.
Well, I thought it was the worst English accent I've ever heard.
Yeah, so I wasn't crazy about that.
And then he won me over.
Yeah, exactly the same. Right, he won me over. I liked the character more and more. I mean, I like the guy, but I liked his performance of this character. I like the seediness and the nastiness, and that he becomes so pathetic and such a joke. Mark Ruffalo does end up carrying that off very well, I think. So there are lots of things that I like. What I didn't like was and you'll say maybe I am over focusing on the sexuality, but let's talk about it for a minute because it is important to the film and it's a huge part. I didn't like the idea that the film is essentially suggesting when she goes to a brothel and becomes a prostitute, she sees it as this incredibly practical thing of, I like sex, she's been discovering sex, I like sex and I'm in need of funds and I will do this. So, it removes so much, it removes all the, what essentially says you're living in a man's world and this is an incredibly practical way of turning that into business. And I don't know if it thinks it sees that as empowerment. I really don't. And I also don't like the idea that were she to, in Victorian Paris, where she is at the time, Victorian obviously being British, but in Victorian era Paris, were she to, become a prostitute at a brothel, that she would have agency and freedom, which she certainly appears to. Like the idea, there's no suggestion. I mean, she's in prison when she's at the home where she begins her life with the scientists, and they try to, effectively legally imprison her with that contract. Later on in the film, when her mother's, I guess, husband, finds her, he attempts to imprison her. Those are prisons. The brothel somehow isn't. I don't buy that.
No, I don't agree with your reading of that. Mm-hmm. Because I think it begins with her finding a very rational way of getting funds when she needs them. Though, interestingly, you're later told that she doesn't really need them. She's just kind of following on the adventure. So initially she doesn't need it. She's following on an adventure. Then subsequently she needs it. And it's kind of thinking everything through very logically. But then she begins to be aware, and the film dramatizes her growing awareness of her lack of agency. Yeah, kind of. And there's all these discussions. Why do the men choose and not the women, right? And then there's a line later on where she says something that it had made her dead or something. So I don't think the film minimizes the results of that kind of life, or the potential results of that kind of life. But I think also there is a kind of a liberal moralization around sex work. And it seems to me that the film does have that logic. There is that logic, and which is not to say that it also isn't kind of very exploitative and damaging. But I think the film dramatizes that well, and incorporates all the criticisms. I noted, that this aspect of her being in the brothel, which I think is one of the most daring aspects of the film, is also the one that's been most criticized.
I've not seen it. I mean, I didn't know what happens in the film. I've not seen any.
I was just reading through the Wikipedia page before we talked.
Oh, sure, right. Well, I mean, I can understand that, and I can imagine people being just uncomfortable with the level of nudity and the freedom with which it shows sex and that sort of thing. But and I don't have a problem with any of that, and I think that somebody is really bold and very funny, and it's valuable. I mean, it's part of the film. It's worth seeing it. It's part of this character. Like, the film is not the same if you don't see all this.
It's incredibly courageous of Emma Stone. I mean, I think it's one of the most daring performances I've ever seen, and that really does revolve around the sexuality. I can't think of a major star, and she is one, where she's, nude, fully frontal, in so many different scenes in the film. And it's not just the nudity, but also, the sexual dimension to it. Yeah, the sex acts that are involved in the depicting of that sexuality. So to go into those areas, I thought, kind of quite extraordinary. And of course, it's rendered palatable through tone, yeah, because throughout all of these sequences, the film maintains a kind of a comic tone.
Yeah, I mean, this is very Yorgos Lanthimos. He plays things, or he plays his scenes with kind of deadpanness throughout that gives everything, a comic remove. If these things were played in earnest, they wouldn't be the same. And sometimes it really works for me, and sometimes it doesn't. And early on, I was finding some of it not working that well. And also, it's also in the way the dialogue is written. Again, this is something reasonably common to his films, although I think, again, it's extremely heightened here, the way that people speak in unusual kind of, and I'm not talking about like unusual like Mark Ruffalo with an accent, but it's the dialogue, right? It's the particular words that are used, and it's contextualized. Certainly with the Emma Stone character, it's contextualized because she starts off as an infant. I mean, her progression to sexuality. It was initially very uncomfortable because, although she's Emma Stone, she's 34 or whatever. She her mind is that of a child, and yet she's discovering masturbation, discovering sexuality, and then you've got this thing about the assistant character having feelings for her and wanting to marry her, and he's one who knows exactly what she is, and so it's kind of uncomfortable. But once she's going off with guys who have no idea, she's weird as far as they're concerned, but they have no idea, this childhood brain in her.
She's weird because they can't conceive of female sexuality independent from them, right? Because what's so interesting about the film is, that it takes kind of female sexuality and female agency as a given, and then kind of depicts it to the shock of men, right? So her pleasuring herself, the thing with the cucumber, right, when she's meant to be very young. Yeah, her delight at kind of, what she's feeling, her wanting more. I mean, all of these things are things that kind of women are not supposed to want. And certainly these men find it kind of both, delicious and distressing. So
it initially serves their interests, and then becomes out of hand when they can't control her, and when she goes off with other men in particular, and that's particularly what drives Mark Ruffalo absolutely insane. And also when she, quote unquote, reunites with her husband at the end, that's something that he is taken aback by, and it's delivered by Bella. The news that she has been a whore, and that's just it, is delivered in a matter-of-fact, deadpan way. That's the way her character sees it, and it takes him by surprise, and the joke comes out of that. It always works that way, right? There's always a manner of delivery that makes a joke out of it.
I mean, I think it's quite an amazing film in going into all of the areas that are really still taboo. All of the men in her life are all wanting to cater in one way or another. As you said, the Godwin character, the Willem Dafoe scientist, doesn't want her to leave the house, just the same way that the abusive husband at the end doesn't want her to leave the house. The nicest one is the medical student, right?
The assistant.
Yeah. But there's a way in which that kind of love is also its own kind of form of control, which is why it's so interesting that she decides to leave.
But it is crucial, I think, that when, on their wedding day, she jilts him out the altar, effectively.
Yes.
And he has no problem with it. He's not any other guy, well, the Mark Ruffalo character would have thought, no, this isn't happening. But he is like, he understands, and he's not going to fight her. And there's also a line which is slightly out of place, maybe, but a line about what you do is with your body, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
When she's asking, aren't you jealous of all the men I've slept with, or whatever it is? What you do is your body. So he's very enlightened for his time.
Yes. And then there's the Mark Ruffalo character, who basically, his idea is to be with her for a few months, use her up, and then dump her. He says that, right? And of course, because she behaves so innocently in such a pleasurable way, he completely falls in love with her. And the response to him falling in love with her is to attempt to cage her. He literally kidnaps her and puts her in a boat where she's got no way out, right? So, and then that's repeated again, by the guy who ends up being her husband in her former body, right? In her former identity, who also locks her up in his house. Right, so kind of, the film weaves through these different strands of, male domination and control, and how they respond to a woman who's in the process of self-creation, of self-development and self-creation. And none of them like it. And, they're all entranced by it, but on the one hand, but they also want to control it, limit it, tame it on the other. And I think the film, dramatizes that so incredibly well.
The Mark Ruffalo line you mentioned, this is a minor thing, where you say he says quite explicitly that he wants to use her up for a few months, then dump her. Does he say that's something that she says? I remember.
No. He says originally, I wanted you to come with me for 3 months, and then kind of I get tired of you and send you home. So I'm sure.
So when he's expressing his love for her, having fallen in love, he says, "This was what I wanted to do originally."
I think after the first time that she goes off on her own in Lisbon and she comes back,
right?
That's when they have that bit of dialogue in the bed.
Okay, I'm not saying you're wrong or lying or anything. I don't remember that line in specific, but that would be because that would play against. She says the same thing to him later, which I do remember, where which enrages him and makes him more jealous and so on and so forth. When they're on the boat, she reveals that she's engaged, which she hasn't done up until this point, and it's to her it's no revelation. Nothing is unusual or meaningful to her in that way. Again, she sees it very practically. I'm engaged to this guy, but I wanted to go off and have sex with you for a long time first, and then I'll go back to him. And it's the same thing, right? I was I had a purpose going off with you, and that purpose has been served. Yeah.
Yes.
And so it's the same idea basically, except when it's done to him.
Except that there's a big difference because she's going with him to an adventure and to see what happens, right? Like, and to learn and to grow and whatever. He is very cynical about it, in the sense that he sees her as an innocent that he could exploit sexually.
Yes, of course.
So I think.
But the idea of using one for sex, that is the same. The purposes are different. But the idea of I will go off with you because I want to fuck you for a while, that's the same.
Well, except that's not her idea. I mean, she's not saying I want to go off with you to fuck you for a while. She
says that.
Well, I'd be very surprised if those were her words. Her words are about growth and development and adventure, and about wanting to jump, whatever her expression is.
Yeah.
Jump on him or whatever.
Furious jumping. That's
jumping.
What I was saying about the dialogue is something that I really didn't go with that.
Oh, I liked it. It makes sense with her.
Yeah.
So I think, so I don't agree with that homology. With, I don't think they had the same designs. I don't think she's cynical at all. And I do think that, kind of the idea of an adventure and of growth and of doing something before she returns home, and finding out what life is, because she feels she's been locked up all her life, is very different than this roue, who goes where he's forbidden to go and basically kind of steals her away from her home, particularly in the context of Victorian, morality, which, we take as a given. So he's doing something very wrong to her, which she's not aware of. I don't think she's doing anything consciously to hurt him at all.
Yeah, I don't know what I've done to upset you, because I agree with all of that.
Okay,
I'm just
then we're clear.
I'm just saying that, like, the in narrow terms, one using the other for sex is that they are both doing that. He can dish it out, but he can't take it. That's basically what's happening there. You know, there's much more going on there, and there are much fuller reasons behind it. They're not doing it for exactly the same reasons, but what they are doing, in a very narrow sense, is the same, and that's what's being expressed in that line of dialogue at that point.
Anyway, I like it. So I like it very much, really. And to me, it does have connections with Candide, because, you know, he goes off on all these adventures, and really what he ends up seeing is raping and pillaging and destruction, and, you know, and he manages to kind of keep his optimism, right? She's different. She goes off on these adventures, and, you know, she, in a way, becomes human, right? But also because part of her characteristic is that she's bound by reason, right? And then, like, there's that whole discussion of, is it Emerson and the boat? Yeah, about kind of self-development and about, you know, human beings being kind of change and development and becoming. So I think that's kind of what she's experiencing, and she's experiencing, or she changes from being somebody who's got kind of a scientific mind that kind of is based on reason, to still having that as a foundation, you know, but also learning about emotion, really. Though, you know, she remains immune to it to a large extent until the end, yeah, when there's a discussion with Godwin, yeah, in a sofa, I've missed you, yeah, and it's still worded kind of with a basis in reason, but you have a depth of feeling that's behind that as well.
She hates him for the way he's brought her into the world, essentially.
Yes.
She hates that she was lied to, and she hates that things were done to her.
Yes.
But she's also grateful for life.
Yes.
And she misses him.
Yes.
And I think it's a very nicely played scene, and it is quite delicate, that confluence of different emotional sort of registers.
It's lovely. I have several moments in the film that have to do not with nostalgia, but I suppose with a lifetime of film going, that were like the filmmakers deploying, and that were so impactful. The first is that camera move at the beginning onto Willem Dafoe's face. Yeah. I think it might be the first shot of him, but there is a kind of a sweeping camera move that just lands on his face, and you go, oh my God, it's Willem Dafoe as Frankenstein, or, yeah, with, you know, because his face is so familiar with those cheekbones and so on. But now, like, opened up and sewn together, and, like, yeah, with this kind of Frankenstein face, yeah? And I thought, wow. And the other bit was the Hannah Shigula moments in the boat, yeah? The woman who played the old lady, yeah? And they have this and they have this conversation about, do you have sex? And, you know, do you masturbate? And they have this conversation about life, and they become friends and so on. And, of course, that is Hannah Shigula, yeah? Kind of, you know, the great star of Fassbinder's films of the 70s, you know, The Marriage of Maria Brown and many others, and, you know, and she was a huge star all over Europe with making films with Vajda and with Godard and, you know, and many others. So her appearance here is kind of a star moment, yeah? Because if you recognize her, if she's somebody who's meant something to you as a film goer, and she clearly has to me, and, you know, I would say many film goers of my generation, all of a sudden, you know, that role is imbued with something other than just the role. Yeah? It becomes a kind of a magic moment, really. And she's got this wonderful stillness, yeah, this kind of soft, slow speaking voice, yeah, and this beatific face. I mean, you know, the face has now kind of grown wider, but it has kind of like this peacefulness and knowledge and wisdom, you know, and it's kind of, she's used very effectively, I think.
I think she's very well cast, and I think most of the film is very well cast. I think Willem Dafoe is beautifully cast. I mean, he's got exactly the right look for his role. He can be, you know, threatening, he can be theatrical, He can be caring. You see all this in him, and he's very capable of bringing these out. The one thing I don't like about his performance, similar to Mark Ruffalo, I think his accent's dreadful, and he's the one connection that the film has to the Scottish origins of its novel, because I believe it's set in Scotland, and the author's Scottish, and he is putting on a Scottish accent sometimes. I mean, it kind of comes and goes, and I do wish they'd rather. I mean, I'm glad they cast Willem Dafoe because he's so good. If they had found a Scottish actor who was very good and just cast him, that would be great. If you're going to cast someone who isn't capable of doing this accent, just drop it. Let him be Willem Dafoe. Yeah. It's embarrassing, and really.
I mean, I must say, I felt different about both of them because, when I first saw Willem Dafoe, and you recognize a kind of, I don't know, a Scottish or tilt or something, and you go, oh, okay, that's what he's doing. And then I kind of didn't pay it any attention. Whereas the Ruffalo, you just think, this is the worst English accent I've ever heard in my life. And it kind of takes you out of the film for a while. Actually.
It's quite reminiscent of Keanu Reeves's all those years ago, do you remember?
Yes.
It's a bloody disgrace, and all this kind of stuff. But it did win me round eventually. Willem Dafoe's never won me round. And the problem with his is that it comes and goes. When it returns a bit Scottish, there's a Scottish vowel in there. All of a sudden you go, oh yeah, he's trying to be Scottish. When he's not, and he just sounds like Willem Dafoe, it's fine. Just, I wish he hadn't tried to hit those vowels every 5 syllables.
We haven't talked about the film's look, and that is perhaps arguably the most distinctive thing about it.
Again, this is very Yorgos Lanthimos, particularly in use of fisheye lenses. He uses extremely wide angles and low angles. I mean, there's the dance scene in this immediately reminds you of the one from The Favourite, shot in the same way. Not only the angles and the lenses, but also the actors coming towards the camera. Which they happen in a couple of shots here, they happen in a couple of shots there, and you think like, I mean, I'm not saying it's like he's just self-plagiarising or whatever, but it's just you go, oh yeah, this is this man's aesthetic.
I love the whole design of the film. Yeah, it has a very particular kind of Art Nouveau-ish look, with buildings that are both curved and angular, right? And actually, it doesn't seem to make any difference whether they're in Lisbon or London or anywhere else they've been. That kind of look of the buildings is very similar. I love.
Although you do get differentiation, certainly.
Okay, I mean, you get slight differentiations, but the film has a unified look. Actually, the interior of the ship, kind of the beds and the round portholes, but the curves and. Doesn't look that different than the London house. Yeah. No,
I'm with you, but I'm particularly like the outside of Lisbon. It looks very different from the outside of Alexandria. It looks very different from the outside of London.
Sure,
those things, and you have these wonderful CG painted in backgrounds that are full of life and imagination, which really reminds me of Terry Gilliam, actually.
That's interesting. Yes, I can see the connection. Anyway, it looks beautiful, and it's very, very, very distinctive. Yeah, and very expressive. Actually, and I noted, because I'm not usually one to stay until the final credits, just because, I mean, I used to be, but then you think, there's IMDb, or if you want to find out who did what, you don't have to sit through 10 minutes. So, and I kind of resent being forced to, sit through third assistant driver kind of credits. But this one I stayed all the way because the images were so captivating.
Yeah, so the credits in this, we should say, are they're rather than scrolling up the screen white on black as is typical, they are white cards on images of white text on images of it's the house, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's it, all the way through the credits. It never turns into black. That's all the way through.
Yeah, you get one image after another, and actually, it's almost like your eye has to find a way into them, because there were many of them. You think, oh, what is this, right?
Well, they really bookend the film because the film opens. So we've had that opening where we've seen her commit suicide, and then we get the credits. I think that's the way around it works. And the opening credits are similar imagery, so it's like one shot after another. They the cutting between them. But they're like quilted pillows, right, or blankets, and the stitching creates images. It's like someone riding a mermaid or whatever it might be. But they're completely white, Like the stitching is white, the blankets are white, and it's just completely devoid of colour. And then we go to a whole segment of the film that's in black and white. I mean, I think one of the reasons that you get the opening shots in colour is to convince the audience that the whole film isn't going to be in black and white, so they won't get annoyed and leave.
Yes.
But the end credits, full colour, all those images, and more textured as well. You know, those images at the start were just these smooth, apart from the quilting, essentially smooth sheets. And at the end, it's, you know, we've got sculpture, we've got thick paint, we've got architecture, really, I think, like foliage and things. Like, so basically, it's like you've sat through a film in which life is brought to this world by this character, really.
Let's talk a little bit also about that world, because it's so fascinating. It's so detailed and inventive, you know. So I noticed when they drive out in the car, you know, that you have all these late 19th century, early 20th century cars, with the steam, like it was kind of very steampunky. But then Godwin's car they're all carriages, but then Godwin has a car, but just the head of a horse stuck to the front.
Oh, I didn't notice that. I didn't remember.
Well, I'm just, you probably wouldn't. The point I'm trying to make is that the film is so detailed, that it offers all these kind of little pleasures. I mean, the more obvious ones are obviously like, I don't know, a dog, with the body of a goose, or those combinations that you get throughout the house that are kind of a pleasure to see in motion as well, right? Because you think of all the effort that must have gone into animating kind of all of that. But, the other details are there as well, which, so I think it's a film to re-watch. It'll offer many pleasures in doing so.
And they're not just, frivolous little details that, just give you the sense of the scientist's mad experiments, but they also give you the final punishment at the end of the film. So this thing about empathy, which empathy and morality, which Bella discovers throughout the film. It's crucial that she discovers when she is reunited with her former husband, quote unquote. She discovers that she, or really her mother, was not a very nice person. So he's a general, I think, or an admiral, something along those lines. He's covered he's a general, covered in medals, huge house, staff, and he's incredibly cruel to them. I mean, when we get to the house, he draws a gun and says, "I'm protecting myself because I'm pretty sure there's going to be a staff uprising soon because they all hate me." And every time he speaks to the staff, he's pointing a gun at them. So we discover that she wasn't very nice either. I mean, we essentially get that from the non-answers from the maid. She's saying, "What was I like? Who was I?" And she won't say anything. It's like, you were a bitch. But she's been learning. She wants to be nice and things are nice, and she likes pleasure. She, the thing with sex, and why doesn't everyone do this every single day, all the time? Why wouldn't people just give themselves all this pleasure? And then she discovers, as you mentioned earlier, or she's shown rather by a cynic, as he's introduced to us in the film. He shows her the slum, dead people who have no money, and he says, if we go down there, they'll just rob us and kill us and rape us. And she's distraught by this side of the world that she hasn't seen, but she's resolved to make it better. I want to be in the world, I want to make it better. It's a really kind of nice thing to it's a really nice characteristic to have, and it's really nice to see that of her. And I think that's why when you get to the very end of the film and she has managed to free herself from this former abusive husband who she doesn't know, they have done surgery to replace his brain with the brain of a goat. That's what she writes at the end, because it's kind of cruel. I mean, they killed the guy, but what it would have been extra cruel would have been to put his brain in the goat's body and make him. Do you know what I mean? Like, that would have been like fucking terrifying, and they didn't do that right. So his body's just going around, but it's not him anymore. So like it's a revenge, but not one that is as mean as it could have been. Like that's kind of important. It's that ending is
Well-
the triumphant music at the end of that, and like the kind of the way in which this house has become theirs because Willem Dafoe's character has died, he passed it on and everything. And they've had the success and like made the life their own, and she also got her friend from the brothel who she wants to be a socialist with, although that's an area which I'm not sure the film really carries off quite so well. But it's a happy ending.
Yeah. It's a happy ending that belies quite atrocious actions, because that's what all they do, kill the husband, right? And the motivation for keeping him in a goat's brain, keeping his body in the goat's brain, is to me not as kind as you make it out to be, because I mean basically they have to keep him alive or be accountable for his death, right? So keeping him alive, or keeping him seemingly alive, means that he's dead, so he won't get revenge. But actually, to the world at large, he is still alive. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope I didn't say it was nice. It's just not as cruel as it could have been.
Yes. So the last thing I want to comment on is, again, just returning to this, because I believe the film was shot in 35mm in a process called ectachrome, which was discontinued for many years. And this is one of the first feature-length films, that has been shot in the process since. And I looked it up a bit because the film has such an unusual and beautiful use of color. Yeah, it really stood out for me. And so, when I got home, I thought, I wonder how this was shot, right? And so I just want to signal both that it is very beautiful and that it is the result of this return of Ektachrome 35mm film, which the Poor Things was shot on.
So Ektachrome I don't know very much about. If it has any relationship to the likes of Technicolor and anything. Basically, I don't know how old the process is, but there was a shot. I think it's when you return to the imagery of Bella, or as her mother, throwing herself off the bridge. There's a return to that imagery at some point in the film, and there's a shot of her face and the blue sky in the background, and it's the quality of the film, and it's the quality of the colours. The red of her lips, the blue of the sky, really made me think of like Meet Me in St. Louis. Do you know what I mean? It had those qualities of that era, and it's the only shot in the film that made me think that. But I found that incredibly striking just for a shot.
Yeah. No, I thought. I mean, for me, actually, they looked a little bit like the Powell and Pressburger kind of color films of the 1940s, like The Red Shoes and Black Narcissus, because it's Technicolor, but it's a bit more muted than kind of what you get in like Meet Me in St. Louis. So it has.
Well, that's probably why that's the only shot that made me think of that.
Yeah. So I really loved it. It really stands out, and it kind of helps in the creation of this imaginary world where kind of things are so strange, but you adapt to that kind of strangeness, to this world that's being built for you really quite quickly. I think it's kind of one of the major successes of the film for me.
So it's an interesting film to think about and to talk about, and I've enjoyed the conversation. I do think I have not resolved the issue that I have with its use of the brothel, sexuality, the way in which it does seem to say, this is a man's world, and the only success you can really have in this man's world is to use the men, and exploit yourself for business.
I never get the sense that she's using them. I mean, I think that's kind of, for me, one of the film's achievements, really. She's going with them. She doesn't have an idea. By using it means, okay, I want this, and I'm going to go with this guy to get that. You never have a feeling that she's got an end goal. I mean, she's going with them to have an experience of seeing what going with them will be like. But she's not out to use them in the way that they are to use her, where they're saying, I'm going to take her with me and I'm going to do this to her.
Yes, fair.
Yeah.
I meant more specifically the men who visit the brothel. You're right about the men with whom she travels and stuff.
Well, I think the brothel scene for me is...
Because some of that sex is close to rape, some of it. And she has this line about how harsh it was, but it was kind of pleasurable in a way. And again, for her, it's a learning experience.
That to me is the greatness of the film, right? That it both acknowledges, that sex and brothels can be brutal and exploitative. They tell you very clearly that her pleasure is never a consideration for these men, right? And also, I find it very honest, to think that kind of brutalizing sex can be a thrill. Yeah, because it clearly is to some people, right? Like, So the fact that it acknowledges all of those things is part of what makes the film so daring, and so complex, right?
Yes, I understand that, and I agree with that in part. But I also think that the film doesn't at any point suggest that. Well, it's like what I said at the start, right? She, in the brothel, she is essentially free, right?
But she's not. I mean, and actually, this is where the madam comes in. Who gives her an illusion of freedom, who offers her chocolate, but before you know it, she's drawing kind of blood from your earlobes, right? And she is, and at one point she says, this is how you control. She too is controlling, like the men, right? She says, you offer us croissant and chocolate only to control us,
She can leave that brothel at any point. And I don't think that's...
Well, she can, and eventually she does.
Exactly.
Right? But until, she finds a reason to leave, then she doesn't. I mean, I don't have any problem with that. I do think that is the most challenging section of the film. I think it's the one that audiences will find most uncomfortable. And I think because of all of that, it's also one of the reasons why the film is so great. That it will make people uncomfortable and think about all of these things that are kind of almost verboten, really. Or, that people are so moralistic about, that they don't think about, both ends. It's always either or, So there's no question that kind of women have found a way out. Through prostitution. There's also no question that way out is extremely kind of dangerous and might be a trap of its own. I think you get all of that in the film, So, whereas I think, in other types of discourse, you have, people saying, oh, this is just work like any other sex work, it's work like that. Well, it's not, clearly, right? But also, is it just, patriarchal domination and control, right? So I think the film raises those questions. The answers, not the answers, but there will clearly be a lot of debate around it. And I think part of the reason why the film to me is so great is that for people who watch it, it'll ignite a discussion on all of these issues. And I bet you there'll be countless articles written, particularly by feminists on the film. Right?
I think, having thought about it while you were speaking, I think that part of the reason I have an issue with the brothel stuff is that idea that everything for Bella is a learning experience. Because when you see some of the behaviour that the men show towards her, I'm thinking particularly of the huge bloke who kind of bends her over by the wall and just spreads her legs, and there's no dialogue, no talking. He's just positioning this, sex doll effectively the way he wants. And I think that's the one after which she says, that was unbelievably rough, but there's something pleasurable about it. That's something that, because everything's a learning experience for her, she doesn't mind it. She's learning from it.
No.
And I think that's that characteristic of her, which is her kind of central characteristic in the way she behaves and everything. And it's just the design of the character. She's logical, and she doesn't take offense to things and that sort of thing. I think a quote unquote normal woman, one who is not like her in a kind of quirky way, would have issue with the way that she's treated, that she doesn't. I think that's kind of a problem. Because
Well-
it essentially means that she's able to divorce the idea that she's being mistreated from her experience.
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think the film is very good at dealing with all of that. I mean, when you when you read about kind of process experience, there is, they often talk about disconnecting, right? Like, and so on, because it is unpleasant, and the film doesn't deny that it is unpleasant, right? Or that it is exploitative, or in fact that she has no choice in who she's with, right? Kind of all of those things, I think, are played out in the film. They're dramatized, right? But I think what the film does is also to take on board contradiction, that it might be both, brutal and exploitative, and, that there's some pleasure that could be found in that for some people.
Okay. Let's not continue to litigate that one. I think we've said everything we want to say.
Yeah.
And
it'll be endlessly debated, I'm sure. So.
Well, who the fuck cares what other people have to say? So your overall thoughts?
It's my new favorite film. I loved it. I think the discussion we've had is proof of that. It's been really interesting to talk about. I think there'll be a lot more to talk about, in further viewings, and certainly kind of, in terms of what other people say. So I highly recommend it. And I think particularly if you're interested in film, see it on a big screen whilst you can, because you will be reading about it for a much longer time than it will be available to see on a big screen. I think it makes a big difference to see it on a big screen.
Yes, yeah, you should see it on a big screen, and you should see it. And, despite my issues with it, there's also a hell of a lot that I liked. So, yeah, it's really good.
All right, well, on that note, thank you all very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. It's funny what you were saying about the end credits as well, because you were talking about, normally I just want to go home and look on IMDb. IMDb's there. Well, I'm having to sit through all these boring credits. And I was thinking the one thing you've got to do with these credits is go to IMDb, because you can't fucking read the text.
Yeah, that's true.